Welcome back to Rooted in Impact, a United Way of Coastal and Western Connecticut podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Gaudiano, and today I'm joined by Andrew Ferguson, co-founder of The Neighborhood, Connecticut's Network for Service. Andrew brings over a decade of experience in education, philanthropy, and systems change here in Connecticut. But what stands out to me and why I'm so excited for this conversation is how so much of his work centers on people, on relationships, leadership, and community connection. So Andrew, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you, Ashley.
Yeah. So, Andrew, let's just jump right in. You have spent a lot of time in various sectors, like I said, education, philanthropy, systems change. You want to give us just a brief who are you, and then we can talk about your work today.
Sure. So 20 years ago, I moved to Connecticut, to New Haven, Connecticut, to start as a school teacher. I taught fifth and sixth
Oh, wow.
grade. Yeah. And I was there as Teach for America was coming in its first year to Connecticut. So I was part of the founding core of Teach for America Connecticut. And just so lucky to be a New Haven public school teacher of the fifth and sixth graders that I was just so fortunate to teach and build relationships with. I'm still close with a handful of them, many years later. And they and the experience I had with them and their families in the community of New Haven really just changed the kind of arc of my professional life. Went to law school. I've worked in state government. Through state government, I was super lucky to meet Barbara Dalio at the time when she was thinking about building out her foundation, now known as Dalio Education. We worked together for 10 years as partners, building that out with a team of incredible people. That led to the Connecticut Opportunity Project. It led to the Connecticut Rise Network. It led to many other endeavors. And then recently, 2025, I started what's now called Redwood Endeavors, which is a platform for multiple public benefit initiatives, including the Neighborhood, which is a new Connecticut-wide network for service specifically geared toward the state's most active volunteers and civic leaders, and Redwood Fellows, which is a statewide community of influential leaders who seek to build deep, trusting relationships to help bridge divides, help lean into differences, and find common ground to strengthen Connecticut. So it's been a fun 20 years. It's been a meaningful one, and the through line is always just trying to work with people to be helpful to more people, and that's in a nutshell kind of who I am.
Yeah, I love that. And let me just say, bless you for teaching elementary students. That is no easy feat, but such an interesting journey. And, I guess my initial question for you is when you have done this work and over time, when did it become clear that relationships and leadership development and people were just as critical as kind of the direct programming, the policy work, the funding that you did in that Dalio education space?
I think honestly, it's always been clear to me, and I, trace that back to how I was raised, where I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My parents, my friends in childhood, my siblings. I mean, that's just been wired into me from the very beginning, such that when I was, leaving, graduating high school and then college, I kept thinking, like, what experience gives you the most leadership opportunity as a 21-year-old? And it's really like, be a public school teacher or join the military. And I looked at both. And it was because of Teach for America that I became a public school teacher in Connecticut. And that, is the best leadership development experience, for a 21-year-old imaginable, because from day one, you are responsible for other people and,
Right.
accountable to deliver results, even if you don't know what you're doing, which was my situation. And, that kind of, building community, the importance of relationships, all of that was paramount because, yes, we got to math, science, reading, and writing, but it couldn't happen unless we first built trust among the group. And that means we had to build relationships. And it took a while, but we did. And once we did, everything flourished.
Yeah, and I think we're at this moment in time where trust building and building across divides and differences is so critical. How do you think about where to even start with that?
I mean, to me, you start with relationships and then you start with people with whom you may not naturally find yourself in community. And so, like, what I mean by that is, of course, we all have our relationships, but, I think too often the way the world works, especially with the way our media and social media and the algorithms work now, like, we are just nudged toward smaller and smaller circles of people who are more and more like us. And so, if that's a path that you find value and want to be on, in some ways, that's the default journey of life these days. If that's not the path you want, because you want to build a bigger tent, you want to find people who disagree with you, you want to understand and lean into and embrace diversity, you want to find ways to work across differences to build a stronger Connecticut. If that's the path you want, I think you really have to be intentional about going to seek it out. And so in doing that, I really try hard to find people who are not like me, people who disagree with me, people who have had very different life experiences than me, and then find ways to build community with them, find ways to build a relationship with them. I do that on an individual basis. I do it in terms of some of the initiatives that I've created and lead. And I do it, with others who share that view, because I find that the more and more that you can seek that out and contribute toward creating it, the more and more it starts building momentum by which others start to join. And before you know it, like, you've created, a whole new thing.
Yeah, I think sometimes that can feel not only scary, right? But also really difficult to know where to start with that, right? And to your point, the media we engage in, the digital ecosystems are designed to create small spaces. So what does it look like to intentionally create those spaces, and how are you doing that with the neighborhood?
Yeah. And so a couple of things. One, to answer your last question first. So how are we doing it with the neighborhood? So the neighborhood we started last year, basically just listening and learning to anyone that would meet with us to understand, when it looks at Connecticut, ways to increase volunteerism, increase the number of neighbors helping neighbors, people involved in service in support of their community. What's happening in this state? What's going on? And, in doing kind of listening and learning around those broad topics, we ultimately zeroed in on a very specific group of individuals who are actively showing up in community as volunteers and civic leaders. And, the only common thing we looked at was just, are they actively showing up? We didn't look at what political party are they? What generation do they represent? What sector were they employed in? Are they still working? Are they retired? Right? Any of the other things that too often are binaries or qualifiers placed upon us that lead to dividing us. We don't take any of that into account. We just look at who is consistently showing up for their community. Once we look at that, we seek to find ways to meet you in person in every community in this state. We seek to share a meal with you. We seek to build a relationship with you, because we genuinely want to have that relationship so that we can understand, how do you get involved in service and volunteering? What motivates you? What keeps you going? What are your goals, aspirations? What keeps you up at night? What are you worried about? What are the challenges? Those kind of questions, I think, are really important to understand, because yes, they're individual. In some cases, they're nuanced and specific to a particular town or city. But too often, like, they're thematic that start to
Yeah.
span across towns and cities, across generations, across all these binaries. And before you know it, like, we've created this whole new community with and for our most active volunteers and civic leaders that pays no attention to our differences, but really unites us in service to the community we call home, and in service to each other in ways to strengthen Connecticut. And so that's one of those efforts that is still underway. It's every day it's building, but it's one that at its core is relationships built on trust, despite any differences that otherwise would divide us.
And that filter is really simple, right? How and who is consistently showing up for their community is really kind of a simple concept, but you've got to peel some things away to get there. And so, as you are touring Connecticut cities and towns, what are some of those themes that you're hearing?
Absolutely. And so far we've met in 13 different communities with 149 of our most active civic leaders and volunteers. And some of the kind of themes that start to emerge is love of place, love of the hometown or city is such a strong motivator for civic service. And also the desire to be in community with other people who are like me. Meaning, if I'm an active volunteer in my community, I want to know who are the other active volunteers in their communities. Why? Because, like, if I can be helpful to them, I would love to share with them some of the things that I'm proud of in my community. But I also have needs in my community. And so, like, maybe they have things that are working that could actually be solutions to meet some of those challenges that I'm experiencing. So, like, I would love to have a relationship such that if I email or call them, like, they'll respond and they'll share with me too. And so that kind of, love of place, desire to be in statewide community is a really important theme that's part of all of this. The other piece is, leaders too often, particularly those who are volunteering in civic service, they're starting to feel burned out and they're starting to worry about succession and like who's going to come after me whenever I retire from volunteering. And, that is a real challenge. And so it's one that isn't just experienced by a town, but it's experienced across all of our 169 towns and cities. And so that's one where there is no magic answer to how you address succession challenges in service, but it's one where if we all build a community to support each other, knowing that's a common need, I'm confident we'll be more likely to figure out solutions for it because we're working together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see that day to day, both in the nonprofit work and then in with the municipal hats that I wear. And it is, right? It's something that keeps me up at night thinking about who are the volunteers and civic leaders who will step up. I'm sure that our volunteer fire departments feel the same thing, that, our library service providers, right? It doesn't really matter what area you're in. But I do think the more that you can highlight the great work that's happening, the more that you can make people feel like they are not alone in their willingness or desire to be of service, right? Those sorts of communities make it easier for people to either keep going or to create bigger and broader communities so that you find new people to step into leadership and civic leadership roles over time.
Completely agree.
Um, Andrew, what do you feel like people need most in order to sustain their commitment to service? Whether it is, again, kind of in a nonprofit leadership role or that civic leadership role, what do they need?
I think a lot of the answer is specific to the person. That said, one common kind of set of ingredients is when you look at like the research base around what makes people happy and joyful and just well, a lot of the research orients around one, are they doing things that align to their purpose, things that give them meaning in life? And two, are they doing those things with people they care about, people with whom they're in relationship? And when the answer to those two questions is yes, that is the foundation for joy and happiness within people. And so I think that, what you need is a bunch of things specific to your individual case. And you need to do stuff that gives you meaning with people you care about. And when you
Yeah,
have those two things, everything else becomes much easier. And your ability as a human to sustain hard work, becomes much stronger.
yeah, I love that. So I think that's a perfect segue into the recent award that United Way has received as a Weaver host community from the Aspen Institute. And I know that you are intimately familiar with the concept of Weavers. It really focuses on strengthening trust and belonging and social connections, so much of what you're already doing. It focuses on bringing people together and really having the opportunity to award small micro grants to people who are doing some of this incredible work. So, Andrew, just briefly on that, when you hear that concept of social fabric, weaving social fabric, what does that mean to you in practical terms, and how does that intersect with what you're doing?
I mean, to me, weaving is community building. It means building relationships with people who you aren't already in relationship with. It means finding ways to include people in activities. It means finding ways to weave together, to use the verb, to weave together, your mission and purpose and passion with theirs and vice versa. all hopefully to make your community better off than otherwise would have been had we not wove ourselves together. I mean, there's that great metaphor of kind of quilt making as it applies to community building. And, we all have kind of our square in the quilt to contribute that, alone they're squares, but together they're a quilt. And that metaphor, I think, is really, really powerful. And it speaks to, what Dr. King talks about often in terms of just this kind of fierce network of mutuality, the kind of how we're all just interdependent upon each other. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? All of that to me is about weaving. And it's also why I'm just very excited. The United Way, has been recognized for that, has some resources because of the award, and is able to help, recognize, more and more people in Connecticut, because the truth is there are already, thousands, tens of thousands of weavers in Connecticut, even if they haven't been officially identified as such, right? I mean, a weaver is a neighbor who is working with other neighbors to make their community better. And so I'm thrilled that, we'll have a chance to help spotlight folks who are doing just that.
Yeah, I am too. I think it's a really exciting opportunity to highlight some of the incredible work that's happening in pockets, right? And in neighborhoods in a way you wouldn't normally think about. Um, Andrew, is there somebody or an instance when you think about weaving that comes to mind, right? An example to put some context to that concept for people?
Caroline Tamby Smith. And so Caroline Tamby Smith, she's a resident of New Haven. She's an alder of Ward 9. And look, we got a lot of snow this past winter.
We
And,
did,
you
and
know,
she's got some cool work going.
she does. And so, for some folks, when it snows and the sidewalks get, covered and the bus stops get, plowed over and, some folks complain. Caroline doesn't. And so what Caroline has done, now going on a few years running, is she, through just basic technology, the WhatsApp, the Google Sheets, has organized 80 of her neighbors to become a basic shovel brigade,
Yeah.
by which, she has just corralled, woven together some of these neighbors to come out and shovel the sidewalks of others for the community to be stronger. And that's one concrete example of many that Caroline herself is an incredible weaver. But that's one example of many that I know, tens of thousands of Connecticut residents across this state are weaving in their own way. But certainly she comes to mind first.
Yeah, her work, her social media, if people haven't followed it, is wonderful. But her shoveling work, for somebody who is in municipal government as well, is certainly a model that we and others are looking to replicate. So kudos to her. Um, our time is quickly coming to an end. So, Andrew, what feels possible in Connecticut now that maybe didn't a few years ago, whether it's because of the vantage point you have now with the work you're doing, or just this moment that we're in? What feels possible now?
Well, I mean, it's like I'm always an optimist, but I'm also a realist. And, Connecticut is a hyper local community. It's a, community that's operating in the context of a complicated world that becomes more complex, it seems, by the week, right? All of that is true. Whatever the path towards solutions that benefit more and more people, whatever that path, the foundation for it is built on relationships. Everything I've done, from being a classroom teacher to working in state government to working in philanthropy to being part of a large, though unsuccessful, public-private partnership with the state of Connecticut to creating nonprofits, everything I have done, relationships are at their core. Nothing is possible without relationships, particularly trust-based relationships. And so whatever the future holds, it will be better if we all lean into weaving and building relationships with each other, especially seeking to build relationships with people who aren't otherwise in our community, who aren't otherwise like us. If we can transcend differences, bridge divides in a state as hyperlocal as Connecticut, I'm confident there's a path to even greater good for more and more people across this state, one that simply is, far more abundant than one that historically we've, realized in this state. So I'm always optimistic and I'm always doing my part to help contribute toward creating more relationships.
I appreciate that glass half full perspective and the optimism that you have. I think the work that you are doing is tremendous, and I'm really excited that the weaving work that we will be undertaking is going to intersect so nicely. I think you have reinforced and reminded us that trust and relationships and leadership are so intertwined. And by investing in people, pulling those relationships and those acts of service to the surface, we can really build out a stronger, more robust Connecticut and hopefully serve as a model for other communities and other states across the country as we kind of journey towards building across bridges and across divides, which is just so necessary. So thank you, Andrew, for your time today and for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
At United Way of Coastal and Western Connecticut, we work side by side with our community to address critical needs and advance equitable pathways to well-being and financial security for everyone. Rooted in Impact is a podcast that highlights how we are making a difference in our communities. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to learn more about us, visit unitedwaycwc.org. And if you're interested in being our podcast sponsor, we'd love to have you. You can find new episodes every other Tuesday wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts.